Risk management done properly is going to be done in the context of the business strategy, operations, the objectives and performance of the organization. Too often, risk management is done more as a compliance exercise, and it's more reactive in looking at risk after the fact, particularly risk events that have materialized and hit the organization, instead of being proactive and looking at how can we actually provide value to the business in achieving its objectives. We need to really emphasize that risk management involves aligning risk with the organizational objectives. They can be entity level objectives, division, department, process, project, asset, or even things like relationship level objectives or ESG objectives. We need to align risk with the objectives of the organization, and then in that context, understand the risks to those objectives. ISO 31000 states it very well that risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. Risk needs context. It's not just a bunch of threats and hazards, but it's the objectives of the organization and how can threats, hazards, or even opportunities impact the achievement of those objectives. And that's good risk management, is aligning risk with the objectives of the organization. And again, that can happen in layers. And it's also proactive. It's looking at what's coming at us, what's developing on the horizon, 6 months, 12 months out, across things like geopolitical risks, economic risks and uncertainty, project and operational risks, and all these as the organization tries to achieve those objectives. What are the scenarios that can play out, and what's the best path forward? So we need to align enterprise risk with the overall strategy and integrate it into strategic planning. And in that context, risk needs to be aligned with the objectives, and we need to take a proactive approach in understanding what's coming at us.
Great point, and I would add maybe also including the sort of compliance approach to risk management often is perhaps expanded a bit to the protection of the assets or functions and operations of the organization, but it's looked at as a sort of operational continuity exercise rather than sort of strategic thinking process support tool. So I would even argue that you would need risk management to define the strategy in the first place, so that you actually use it to understand your mission environment, you understand the threats and opportunities ahead of different must-win battles and strategic options, sort of. And then you can in a more sort of structured way to analyze how much risk we are willing to take when you understand the possible options and the risks that they entail. And I think that all organizations who want to grow, they tend to take as much as risk as they can in order to grow, but they want to be on the safe side, so the calculated risks. But too often I don't see any risk management practitioners working with the strategic decision-making processes, not defining the options, not defining the objectives. They are given to them, and then at best they are asked to sort of identified risks against those strategic objectives. Do you see, Michael, that risk management can play out as sort of a role in the strategic design process before we even get to the strategic objectives?
Most definitely, and that's where we integrate, risk and strategy together, and how can we effectively incorporate that. This involves, incorporation of risk management into the strategic planning, where every stage of strategic planning, we need to ensure that potential risks are considered when formulating and executing strategies. And this also involves that there's effective, cross-functional collaboration, where there's different areas of risk. And this is what I call risk orchestration. And one chief risk officer at a high-tech firm called it the rhythm of risk, managing and planning and engaging risk in the strategic planning and aligning risk with the objectives of different executives and operational management. But the risk orchestration, there's a lot of different departments and functions of risk out there. And the chief risk officer's role is that conductor of the orchestra to make sure that all these different pieces and parts are working together, and to see the big picture of risk across all these different groups and sections. And so we need a strong cross-functional collaboration on risk management, and not all these different silos that don't get complete risk visibility and see these risk interconnectedness. The risk interconnectedness. The physicist Fritjof Capra stated, "The more we study the major problems of our time, the more we come to realize that they are interconnected and interdependent." These are systemic problems. And he was talking about biological ecosystems at the time, but he might have been talking about risk in the corporate environment. Risk materializes and it's this interconnected risk environment. It just doesn't happen in silos. That silo impacts other risk and cascades and has exponential, growth and issues on the organization. And so we need to be able to see across different risk silos out there as well as we work into that strategic planning.
That's great comment. And what we sometimes do with the most advanced customers is that we take a set of the most critical risks identified in the, let's say, standard impact likelihood type of exercise, and then we identify what are the interdependent risks of those most critical risks. Which events, which sort of risk could sort of trigger those risks, or what are the sort of causes of those risks? Sort of the bow-tie model, but using multiple risks at the same time and doing the cross-impact analysis in a systemic way. And then we can calculate also the net effect of different risks and phenomena and multiply that with the impact and likelihood scores. And then we get closer to the overall impact of that risk because it also has a cross-impact score. And that's sort of super helpful when you want to sort of have a holistic view on whether you are managing actually the right risks, because listing risks, having impact likelihood analysis on those, it's only half truth. You get a sort of straightforward prioritization between the selected risks, but then you have a set of affecting causes that you're not factoring into the risk assessment, and also you're not factoring in the interdependencies and interconnected of the risks. And certainly, of course, they make a different priority often. And also when you add more criteria, of course, to the risk assessments, what sort of vulnerabilities we have on those risks, etc., the score often changes. So I think that we need to have also more, strategic approach to the risk management methodology itself, how to approach risk so that it can serve the strategic decision making.